one thing I am generally curious about, kind of backtracking a little bit in your history. I know you said that you were from Alaska. Now, I'm not very familiar with the culture in Alaska. I think you're from a small town.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm wondering, from my understanding, I could be wrong, but from my understanding, it's a very conservative state. Am I wrong?
It is.
Or is it more?
Yeah.
Okay. So here's the fascinating thing that I find is not only are you this band from Alaska, which is rare in the music industry that breaks out and is successful, but you yourself are very much an activist at your heart. I feel like music is your passion, but you fused it with activism. And hearing you speak, there's proof in that's what you're passionate about. I guess, even though this is a broad question, I'm wondering, in your perspective, do you know where that drive for activism comes from? Because you've had it from the start, since way back, back in Alaska, I would imagine, right? So
Yeah.
I'm just wondering.
It really did. Yeah, I didn't realize that until very recently that I did. I thought I was kind of new to politics and new to activism. And then, somebody kind of right was like, oh, well, you did all this shit. You did this shit. I was like, oh, yeah, I guess I have. I just didn't see it as the same way I did now. But honestly, I learned it in Alaska because though they vote conservative and stuff a lot, like they're all about community and they're all about taking care of each other. And there is a difference. Like people that go up there, a lot of them just kind of want to be left alone. And so you get flip of the coin, you get the liberal hippie that lives out in a bus in the middle of the woods, or you get, kind of a super red racist guy that lives out in a bus in the woods. Either way, for those who go hiking through Alaska, if you see a bus in the woods and you can tell that somebody lives there, do not go near it. Bad things happen. For some reason, I ran into a shit ton. John will say the same thing. Like, it's just buses out in the middle of the woods that people live in. And yeah, don't go to them. Like, they're out there for a reason, whether they're nice or not. Just like stay away from those kind of things, unless you need help. But everybody in Alaska, they do know that you need each other. And that's where I learned this. And so when people start dogging on systems or, fear of the other, everybody in Alaska, when you break it down, you just got to find common ground. No matter who your neighbor is, you take care of them. So there might be a situation where it's cold and, some shit freezes and you might die if you don't get, some help from your neighbor. A lot of neighbors are really far apart. I grew up in kind of just off of town, technically not in city limits, but it was at my street. So I could see my neighbors. My neighbors were, close-ish. My neighbors were totally close. I could see my neighbors. And John grew up in the middle of nowhere where his driveway was 2 miles long when I met him. And that was one of the short ones.
God damn.
It's crazy. He had, first time I went to his house, he has a 2-mile driveway. And then I pulled in and he had 150 dogs. It was pretty wild.
That
shit.
sounds awesome though. Holy shit. That's
super
awesome.
rad house. Yeah. And it was very, very cool. But I lived kind of in town, not a big town, but yeah, I could see neighbors, and my street got paved sometime when I was in high school or something. So it's this is nice. I had some pavement. But you learn that sense of community. And even with all that shit up there, even with people who are racist or homophobic or something like that, they're not about the people that live there. They'll be they'll cry. And I don't think that's better. I think it's normalizing outward racism. I definitely don't think it's better, but it's just different. It's not there'll be a lot of people can be say some fucked up shit, but then it's dude, you work with a black guy, you work with an indigenous person. It's oh, not Steve. No, man. Steve's my fucking brother.
Yeah.
It's one of those. And it's different. Now, I'm not saying that's cool at all. That might be worse. I'm not sure, but I'm learning things about that. But you got a really strong sense of taking care of the people and being close to your community. And sometimes you fight with them and you don't agree with them, but my whole thing is just be a good neighbor, man. Just be a good neighbor. If everybody tends to be a good neighbor, I think things will just get along better.
Yeah. And it is interesting. I wonder, do you think that it's the reason why that mentality in Alaska, that, you know, everyone has their own opinions. Like you were saying, people in Alaska, in a sense, are probably more individualistic than anywhere else because it's kind of like the final frontier in a way. But do you feel like the dangerous environment? I don't even want to say dangerous, but Alaska is a pretty hard place to live in, from what I understand.
Totally. Yeah,
is that the environment that encourages that sort of teamwork? Like maybe we're not on the same page, but hey, like you were saying, if you're freezing, I'll help you out. If a bear comes, I'll help you out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And that's why a lot of people just don't understand a big bustling metropolis, and they might not totally get, you know, because in general, like there's two ways to look at it. A lot of people look at the government as to help the people. A lot of people think of it as, you know, America's a business, and they're both right. America is a business and it has to be run like that. And so Alaskans are just like the general, I don't want to generalize them because I know like a wild array of psychopaths from up there, me being one of them. And it's like, but it is, people are so tough up there and just like do so much things. It's like, they're just like got that mentality like, oh, I don't know why anybody would need help, like healthcare or welfare or anything like that. You just like, you pick yourself up by your bootstraps and you just like, you know, get shit done. Which is kind of like how it makes sense in that environment, because you have to do it yourself or ask a neighbor. You can't wait around for a system or the police or the government. Is like, dude, nobody's going to help you that quick, and you'll freeze to death or starve to death or something in that amount of time. But a lot of people, you know, don't get to see or live in cities where like, and understand the systems that really create that, like create poverty or create the need to want to like do crime or do things like that. And like, that's the shit that we really need to fix. And like, and I get like a lot of that shit just goes over our heads. You know, we just grew up different. Even though I could see my neighbors, like I'd watch Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and like John was talking about, like I'd watch that when I was a kid. He's like, what the fuck is a neighborhood? Like I never saw shit like that. And so we just had a different perspective, but you just got to understand that everybody does. Everybody's got a different story. And I just want people to tell it. I'm interested in people's stories.
Yeah. It's interesting because what you were saying earlier, how you give this example of someone saying like, oh, here's my friend Steve, you know, he's not like everybody else. And I feel like I'm Hispanic, by the way. I'm born and raised here in Los Angeles, but my parents are from Guatemala. But yeah, it's super rad. I love my culture. LA is a huge melting pot. And so I feel like when you grow up in a place like here, it's everyone is from everywhere else, you know, so you're used to that. But the first times I ventured out into like more rural Los Angeles, the United States, it was definitely a culture shock to find out how very tight knit a lot of these communities are. And as a young kid, I didn't really understand. I feel as an adult, very much like you, I'm beginning to understand more and have more sympathy for the idea that like, you know, a lot of places are you know, kind of isolated to their own little bubble, just like a lot of metropolises in a way are isolated in their bubble as well. But what I like about you is you have this mentality to try and do something with this knowledge that you have.